Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. It's me, Austin, doing another solo episode today. So today we're going to be talking about sustainment, sustainability, kind of being able to resupply yourself. Recently, I was on YouTube and came across a video from Dirty Civilian, kind of reinforcing one of the things that we've talked about a lot on the channel, which is the idea of sustainment, and that we all prepare for a Minuteman-style life, and I know a lot of us get distracted sometimes by the sexy stuff, the night vision, the gear, the guns, because those are all the cool parts, right? We all get into this usually starting with that because we're into firearms, which then leads to the ideas of self-preservation, which generally leads to the ideas of preparedness, and, being prepared to defend yourself, and then taking that usually the step further and saying, hey, maybe there's a disaster or an incident I'm preparing for. Maybe I should have extra food, water, things like that. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today and kind of touch on a few subjects that I think they did a really good job of covering in that video, and kind of give my own take on this, reinforcing some of the things I've talked about before. So before we do that real quick, I do got to thank the sponsor, Blackout Coffee. There is going to be a link in the description on here, and if you're listening on YouTube, check the description. If you're on Spotify, also just go to the bottom of the description on Spotify. There's a link on there with the code AUSTJ20, get you 20% off your first order. It's good coffee. It's great coffee. The best coffee. Some people would say the greatest coffee. But yeah, they do a really good job of supporting pro-Second Amendment causes. They have coffee that is branded for each organization that they give money to, such as the Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners America, and so on. So whenever you buy those coffee, the coffee with that brand on it, you do get to know that you are supporting a cause that is protecting your rights to own a firearm. So good people, great people. They support us, we support them, so check them out. Most of us, when we start getting into the Minuteman lifestyle, generally the gateway for a lot of us into that is through firearms. I know that was how it was for me. I know growing up, we always had the idea of sustainability because we lived out in the country, and a lot of times, there would be times where we wouldn't have power, or we wouldn't have, maybe the pipes would freeze and wouldn't have running water. Certain things would happen to where we kind of had to live, for a day or two, or maybe a couple of days at a time in a more untraditional kind of off-grid way. So for me, like growing up, that was always kind of a part of life, but I never really got personally too deep into it till I got older with me, and it really started getting into it with starting off with firearms. And for a lot of us, that's where our journey starts. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, I think that's where the journey ends as well. That we get caught up in the firearms, we get caught up in the gadgets that go with them, the plate carriers, the battle kit. And a lot of us basically go through this journey where we're like, man, I got my first gun, this is cool, I'm getting into EDC, I'm getting into defending myself. And then we leave our preparations at having the cool Gucci gag kit. And in agreement with the Dirty Civilian channel, one of the things, and I know I feel like we've talked about it a good amount on this channel, is the idea of making sure that you have enough to get through any scenario. Now, one thing that they said that I thought was a really good point, they made the point that a lot of people, and I've heard these people before too, they make the argument that, oh, well, I don't need to prepare to have food and water or whatever. Like, I've got a gun, you've got food and no gun, I've got a gun, now I've got your food and my gun. Because the idea is that, like, for some the people thinking that, they're just going to raid other people who are less prepared and take their things, or they're going to commit violence against other people and take the stuff that they have, and that will be their preparation plan, which I think is an issue on a couple different levels. So one, obviously we have the moral, ethical issue that just because something bad has happened, it doesn't necessarily mean you should immediately throw away your morals and ethics. That's generally how we lead to worse and worse things as time goes on. Secondly, the idea that if you are someone who is going to be raiding, and your plan is to, to take from others or to raid other people, just remember there's always a bigger fish, right? No matter how bad you are, or, how badass you think you are, you could be a former special whatever, right? Someone somewhere is not going to take that lightly, and you might raid the wrong house one day, and someone with a gun is facing you down just as much. So you are introducing yourself into unnecessary danger to acquire the resources that you need to live that you wouldn't have had to do if you'd have just done some pre-planning. A lot of people talk about the tactical side of this also outside of just the guns. We look at like small unit tactics, things like this. Well, one of the things we always talk about is in that world is mission planning. And, do you have what you need for that? We go to part of that is pre-mission planning. And part of pre-mission planning is seeing like, what do you have? What do you need? Okay, do you have everything you need for the mission? Are there things that you will need that you don't have? We do that with a mission set. So why not do that with your life or for whatever disaster or scenario that you're training for or preparing for? I think that's one thing a lot of people skip out on. They get so focused on wanting to basically be, an apocalypse infantryman, they forget that they got to eat. So the other issue with that too, again, kind of is a combo of the first two, where you kind of mix the moral and ethics and the danger part of that, to where, let's say you're in an area and your plan again is to raid other people and take their stuff. Well, one, if you're going in and let's assume you're using violence, but you're not killing people, you're just overwhelming them with force and taking their stuff. Well, now you got a bunch of pissed off people that want their stuff back. So one, you're responsible for the additional suffering that you're adding onto them. And if they have children or if they have other people who are dependent on them, you're responsible for the damage that's going to come to these people because you took their stuff. Secondly, if you do this enough times with enough people, right, especially depending on the geographical layout of your area, how populated the area is, how well people know each other, you're making a lot of enemies. Even if you're in a small group of a certain number of people, and even if you guys are just, 8 Navy SEALs and you guys are badass, down to the bone, you think you could hold them all off, you're eventually building up a numbers game of a bunch of people who have a reason to want you dead, hate you, and they want their stuff back. Now, whether they have the means to take you out, or whether they can contact somebody who does have the means to take you out, becomes an issue for you, because now you've perpetuated an act that has violated your moral and ethics, that has led you down a path to becoming a public enemy and being vilified by the local area. Putting it in video game terms, I know like the Fallout series just came out recently on Amazon. In Fallout, whenever you commit certain actions, it'll tell you, kind of like if I'm thinking of like Fallout New Vegas, if you kill enough people of a certain faction, that faction will start to hate you, right? And to the point to where you show up near that faction, they'll shoot you on sight. In the same way, if your plan for preparedness is to just raid everybody else for their stuff, that's exactly what's going to happen. And it's just a matter of time and a numbers game before you run along the wrong house and you get smoked and become a loot drop for somebody else. All of which can be avoided simply by preparing in advance. So when we look at this, I personally don't see any downside of preparing in advance, right? And I see it as a complete and total lack of oversight for you to prepare all the tactics, all the gun stuff, have the Gucciest kit and all this stuff, but not have long-term preparedness, food, water, shelter, etc. Because to me, none of that means any good, because it's not going to be like D-Day every single day. You're not going to be storming the beaches of Normandy every day of the apocalypse or whatever scenario you're going to have. History is proven that human beings are really good at bouncing back, right? And that eventually some type of civilization is going to return. Probably faster than you think it will. And there will be some type of stability begin to come back under some type of regime, whatever that may be. And if you've been the one committing a lot of atrocities or committing a lot of violence or committing a lot of certain things that are now deemed not cool by the powers that be, that puts a target on your back that I'm not sure you necessarily want. So, getting off my high horse, let's look at this and say, okay, so how do we prevent this? How do we prevent this from becoming a problem? How do we get into this and prepare ourselves to make sure we don't have to do bad things? Because remember, a lot of people throughout history that have done terrible things, whether it be the Nazis, whether it be, insert bad group here who's done something terrible, that's just following orders, has done so because they allow themselves to be put into a compromised position, such as, I mean, like even with COVID, like, people being like, oh man, I got to take the shot because how am I going to feed my family? Or, how I have to keep my job. I got to do whatever I got to do. The government tells me because I need to make sure I put food on the table. Like, you don't want to be in that kind of compromised position in whatever scenario that you're preparing for. So I know, like, right now money is real tight for a lot of people and the economy just seems to be getting worse and worse. But again, there are simple ways you can start to get prepared and start to store up stuff long term. Part of this too is also going to include kind of going back to some older ways of doing things and learning how to get multiple uses out of items and how to find ways to save money where you can. I'm lucky enough that my grandparents, they're both in their 80s. They grew up, they were children towards the end of the Great Depression. One was born in 1939, the other one was born in 1941. And, they were growing up in the tail end of the Depression, but still, they have memories of growing up really poor and the things that they did, that they still do, and they've carried on from their childhood to save money and to get multiple uses out of things because of the times that they went through. And unfortunately, I think that that's a skill that some of us are going to have to learn again. So a simple way, in my opinion, to kind of slowly build up a food storage supply, especially if you're tight on cash. The easiest, cheapest way for me is if you go to the store and you go on your normal grocery run, if simple, easy things. If you go get canned goods, just grab one more can than you normally would. Simple. If you normally are like, okay, I'm buying groceries for 7 days. In a 7-day period, I will generally go through 4 cans of corn or green beans or whatever. Okay, grab 5. That 5th one, put in the cupboard or put on a shelf. Keep track of the date, rotate them out as you buy new ones. Use the old stuff right before it goes bad if you need to or whatever. Like, use your oldest stuff first, but slowly put that aside. And I promise you'll be kind of surprised how quickly some of that stuff adds up. Just simple things like that, like an extra can of beans here and there, right? Another thing you can do as well is a really good source of nutrients and proteins and things like that. Basically, the bare minimums to keep you alive are beans and rice. A majority of the world lives and dies by beans and rice. A vast majority of the world. So for that, they're long-term storage foods. You can store for a very long time. They keep well. They've got high number of calories. They've got good proteins in them. You can replace other meals with them. Are they bland by themselves? Absolutely. Could you spice them up with a few spices here and there? Sure. Can you make other better meals out of them? Absolutely. But as far as a base staple to keep you alive, they are a good thing to have on. Now, you can go down to Costco or to any other like big box store like that. You can generally get a 25-pound bag of rice, a 25-pound bag of beans, and a 25-pound bag of flour. Now, you could generally get all of these things for under $30. It used to be way cheaper, but and that's not total. That's like per piece. But if you've got an extra, $20, go buy the 25-pound bag of rice or a 25-pound bag of beans. If you can't afford the whole 25-pound bag, they sell them generally in 1 or 2 pound bags. Go buy a 1-pound bag of pinto beans and a 1-pound bag of white rice. And every time you go to the store, pick up a bag. I think I was recently at my grocery store in the town where I live, and I think together those things would have been between $5 to $6 for a 2-pound bag of rice and a 2-pound bag of beans. Go ahead and snag them up. There you go. You've got more food than you had, and those store for a long time. Put those back on that shelf, and every time you go, do the same thing. Another simple way too of simple, easy foods. Again, ramen, right? Anyone who's been gone to college or gone out on their own and moved out from mom and dad knows the life of living off of ramen noodles. They're cheap. They've got some decent flavor to them. Basically, pick your flavor of salt. It's not a lot, but it'll get you through something, right? It's food. So that's another easy way to keep as well, and they're simple to cook because, again, with those, the rice and the beans, all you really need is water. Another great way to do that is look for sales. Whenever your grocery store near you is having sales or has coupons, you don't necessarily need to get to the level of extreme couponer, but you can get pretty good deals. The grocery store near me, I was pretty fortunate the other day. They had a 12-hour sale, and they kind of do this once every so often where they kind of have a theme to it, and they mark down a bunch of stuff for 12 hours, dirt cheap. I was able to pick up packets of spaghetti noodles for 28 cents a piece. I picked up 20 of them. My kid goes through spaghetti noodles like it's ridiculous. I mean, if this kid had his way, he would eat nothing but spaghetti noodles with butter and Parmesan for the rest of his life. I don't understand it, but that's just how he is. But on top of that, again, simple, easy food. All you need to do is boil water to cook it, add a little sauce or, seasoning or however you like your noodles, and it's cheap. It was, normally the same stuff they were selling at the store where I'm at, they usually sell it between, $1.50 to $2 a box, and it's 28 cents a box. So killer deal. Stock up while you can, and get what you can afford when you can afford it. So, very simple, easy ways to go do this. And I'm not someone who's very affluent. I'm not making a ton of money. I'm basically like most people in America, making it paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes not even then. And, I'm trying to find these ways to store up on these foods that we can have long term to be able to eat. They don't have to necessarily taste super amazing, but they need to keep you alive. Now, if you can swing it, one of the things you can do is you can get a lot of those ready meals. Companies like ReadyWise, Food for Patriots, Mountain House Meals, things like that. Basically these are dehydrated or freeze-dried foods to where a lot of them are simply add water, heat up, and cook. A lot of them taste pretty good. I've got a lot of the Food for Patriots ones at home. I know a lot of times they're doing deals where basically you buy one of their 72-hour kits and you get 3 free. So if you figure 72 hours is 3 days, roughly, you're getting 3. So you get 9 days. You're getting, a week and a half worth of food with this buy one, get 2 free kits they have on YouTube commercials all the time. And, that's not a bad way to go. The meals are repetitive. They're all the same thing. They're fairly simple. But, me and my family have tried some of them. They're pretty good. The mac and cheese is pretty legit. And they're not too bad. A lot of these companies will try to, scare you through their marketing to try to get you to buy a bunch all at once. And if you can, that's awesome. I know they've got like a 1-year food supply. If you've got the money to just fire and forget, it's a great way to do it. Get like a 1-year food supply, and then you're good, for a long time. You're good for a year. And the downside is, though, it's like, I think it's like $3,000 or $4,000 or something like that to get that kind of amount of food, which, again, if you could swing it and you've got the money to do it, heck yeah. If not, I totally understand. I'm in the same boat. I don't have $4,000 to throw at that. If I did, I would have nods, but I don't yet. So yeah, the Food for Patriots is a great way to go, or similar companies like that. Actually, if you've got a Costco membership, I know they had the ReadyWise meals where I think they had 168 meals in a box, or 168 servings maybe. It was a basically a 5-gallon bucket full of food. And they had them for, I think it was like $69.99 or something like that a piece. Mountain Home Meals, again, too, those are pretty popular for camping, where it's basically you dehydrated food in a Mylar bag, add a little water, let it sit, let it heat up. Great way to go. MREs are also a very good way to go, but unless you are tactically acquiring them from perhaps a military source, they are not cheap anymore. I think Amazon right now has got a half case of MREs for like $50, so that's like 6 MREs for $50. They're not very cheap. If you can get them, they're great for long-term storage. They're great for throwing in your pack. Obviously, they're great for having you in your backpack to go on any type of operation or Minuteman type of thing, because that's kind of the intention. They're very high in calories. Do they taste great? Depends on the one you get. I've seen some pretty good MRE chefs out there whip up some crazy stuff. I've actually, funny enough, got a cookbook. My uncle always gets me joke cookbooks for Christmas, and I've got one that's like eating through the zombie apocalypse, and one of them is actually how to use MREs and make some pretty good stuff out of them with the different MREs that are out there. So I always find that kind of funny, but I've definitely seen some people whip up some good stuff out of MREs and to kind of throw some hacks. There's plenty of stuff you can look that up for on YouTube. But MREs are another great way to get into that too, just to have to store long-term kind of fire and forget. But for people who don't have, the luxury to do that, again, getting little bits here and there while you can, as you can, is a great way to do it. Another great thing too that I've started doing is I grew up in a family that always canned food, and I never really did it myself. It was always something like my mom or my grandma always did, but it's something that now I have my own place and I have my own family. It's something that I started getting into for Christmas. I was telling everybody I wanted canning stuff, so now I've started canning. I've been learning that there's a couple different types of canning, where there's hot water baths, which is basically just canning in a bath of hot water. You don't need a pressure cooker or anything to do that. And that is for certain types of foods, whereas other more acidic foods, you generally use a pressure canner. And luckily I got both for Christmas, which was nice. So I've kind of started learning and teaching myself how to can and different recipes for canning things. You can can just about everything, and that you can make it last a long time. You're basically preserving it in a glass jar to where, until you pop the top, it's going to last for a long time. You can can entire meals. I've seen people do spaghetti, meat, gravy, all kinds of stuff, right? So it's something like that too, to where, you could just make large portions of meals, especially if you're a single person living by yourself and you make a large portion meal, instead of putting it in putting it in leftover bags and throwing it in the freezer or throwing it in the stove, you could can it. And then that way it's already good to go. And next thing you need it, just pop the top, pour it out, and boom, there you go. There you've got your spaghetti noodles with meatballs or whatever it is you've canned. So there's a lot of really good options that are out there. And I think that realistically for a lot of people, canning should be a skill that you kind of learn anyway, just because of the preservation aspect of it and the idea that it's a way to store food that does not require refrigeration, which I think is a very big thing, especially if we ever get into the point of, a potential EMP of losing power or simply long-term blackouts or rolling brownouts, things like that. In the United States, as things kind of get worse, that could be a potential. And so that's something I think would be really important, is how do you preserve your food when refrigeration or freezers might not be working all the time or at all. So as far as food, I feel like we've kind of covered that a good bit as far as just initially getting food to start out with. But another thing I would encourage too is learning how to grow your own food, at least to a certain point. Obviously it depends on you having the land with which you can grow said food. So I understand, not everybody has the capability to grow a garden. Some people live in an apartment, some people live in just areas where that's not conducive, or maybe you rent and your landlord's just not cool with you ripping up the yard and putting in a garden. I get it. For us, where we're at, unfortunately, we're not able to put a garden in, just because that's exactly what it is we rent and the landlord doesn't want us tearing up the yard. But what we have done is we've went out, bought a bunch of planters, fairly large planters, and we're kind of starting basically a front porch garden. Not growing a whole lot. It's our first year growing some stuff out now, but we've got a few things planted. We've got a few herbs planted. We've got an onion plant, a couple tomato plants, a few smaller things here and there, just to help supplement what we have, and to help our kids learn the importance of growing things. And look, this is something that you can do on your own. You can learn how to do this. This is where food comes from. But anything you can grow, even if it's just a little windowsill garden, and you're growing some herbs or some spices, or some herbs or something for the kitchen, or a single tomato plant, a cherry tomato, something like that. It's more food than you had before, and you're starting the possibility of furthering that down the road and getting kind of mastering how to do that. But as far as learning how to garden and when to garden, and oh man, when do I plant these seeds? Is it too early? Is it too late in the season? A lot of times the package will actually tell you, very specifically, hey, if you live in this area, this is when to plant. When the seasons are like this, or at this time of the year, whether or not the seeds will survive a frost, whether they'll be, good in whatever type of weather that you're at and whatever type of environment that you're at. Also, YouTube, huge resource. Also for the canning thing I was talking about earlier. canning, gardening. These are all skills you can literally learn on Facebook. Or not Facebook, but YouTube. And these are all skills you can learn on YouTube. The other thing about that, too, is like if you go down to your local library, for those of you who still know what a library is, you can generally find a lot of books on this to where you can rent them out, read them, see, hey, what grows in my area? What can I grow in my area? And learn how to do that. If you want to take that a step further as well, you could also learn about the edible plants in your area and what you can eat and what you can't eat and what to stay away from wherever you're at. So that way you don't run into the issue of, having to go forage for berries and picking poison berries and, put some kind of poison berries and either dying or spending the rest of your days being dehydrated because you're, pooping in the back shed because you didn't read what kind of berries that you picked. So I feel like we've kind of covered food pretty good. So moving on from there, another thing to consider about too is water. A lot of people's houses have electrical pumps for the water. Have water pumps that are powered by electricity. So if the power goes out, while you will have some pressure in the pumps initially, and you could potentially get water out and fill up, and I would advise you to fill up anything and everything that could possibly hold water with as much water as possible in the beginning, there will be potentially an end to it if the power cuts out, or if for whatever reason you don't have power. It could be, you don't have power or you don't have access to water. And I've seen that happen for things like frozen pipes in the winter or any number of issues. But let's say, whatever the scenario is, you need water. Well, again, going back to the simplest route to do this, an easy way to do it is go to the dollar store or any grocery store near you and pick up a thing of water. The dollar store near me has got a 6-pack bottle of water for $1, or you can go down to the grocery store near me and for $3 to $4 you can get a 40-pack of water bottles. Those are nice to have, just to have in the first place, but next time you go to get groceries, if you can spare $4 extra, pick up a pack of those, right? Set them in the garage, forget about it. Every time you go to the grocery store, boom, there you go, boom, there you go. When you start drinking them, drink from the old ones. If you go to a concert or something, or got a soccer game, you can rotate those out as you don't use them. If not, just keep them stored up there, right? And they'll last for a long time. It's a quick, easy way to store up a long amount of water. I've mentioned it before. One of the things that I do as well for water that I don't intend to drink, but water that I intend to use for washing things, cleaning things that I'm not putting into my body necessarily. Although, even though we could, I would probably just boil it first, is like milk jugs, soda bottles. When you get them empty, wash them out real good, refill them, throw them in the garage. In my garage, I've got a container thing. I've got a shelving unit where I've got milk jugs and 2-liter things of water that I have filled with water. And, I go through them every so often and dump the water out and refill it every so often. Make sure that the milk jugs, since they tend to be more biodegradable, make sure that they are, still holding up good. And if not, then I'll take them out, use them to shoot at, throw them away. But it's a good, easy way to have extra containers of water on hand. If you can, you can go get those 5-gallon or 15-gallon or 10-gallon water jugs. You usually find them at Walmart, big blue things. Sometimes they got wheels. Sometimes they stack. They got all kinds of configurations of them. Or you can even get like collapsible ones that are basically fill up like a bag. You can keep those filled up. They're nice to have whenever you go camping, things like that. Or you can even go as far as getting a 55-gallon drum. Some people I know will have rainwater collectors. Then they'll have those like at the end of their rain gutters, and it looks like a big 55-gallon barrel that sits at the bottom of the drain pipe of your rain gutters, and it's got a filter on it. So basically the idea in theory is that it just captures all the crap coming out of your gutters and then just filters all that out as the water goes in there. You'll still definitely want to filter it, but you'll have 55 gallons of water on tap. And some people will rotate those out and save them all kinds of different ways. If there's a local water source near you, keep tabs of that. Do you have a stream? Do you have a pond? Is it sitting water or is it flowing water? Ideally, you want flowing water, like a fresh stream or pond. Where is it flowing from? Well, how far away from you is it? Is it dangerous to get there? Could you make it because you easily walk there? Do you have a container to carry enough water back to make it worth the travel? Do you have a 5-gallon bucket or something? Or how would you start thinking about, if you had to, how would you get water from point A to point B? a lot of places in the world, it's a reality where people are walking miles a day, to sometimes more than once, to get the water that they need for that day or for a longer period of time. So they use limited amounts of water use. So start thinking too about like, hey, where could we cut back on water usage? I know for some people it might be kind of gross to think about that. A lot of places you don't bathe every day in the world. A lot of places it is an occasional thing. Sometimes it's it's once a day. In some countries, sometimes it's once a week or once every couple days, because water is a limited resource and it has limited availability. So you don't bathe as much, or you have different ways of bathing, like dry baths and things, or you do basically what we call a hose bath, where you take the water and you kind of splash it in certain key areas, wash up those key areas, mainly the pits and the junk area, clean the butt, the stank areas, call it a day. Wash your face, easy day. Brush your teeth, simple stuff, small amount of water, field showers, that type of thing. So start thinking about like where that would be. Obviously, you're probably not running extremely long showers in this scenario, right? Now, if water is on, absolutely, sure, whatever, man. But I mean, like, if water's not, like, probably not giving yourself a 10-minute long hot shower, right? Generally, what's probably going to happen is you're going to have, like, what people used to do. You're going to have one bathtub, and everyone's going to go through the water. That's the way, but a lot of times that used to work. You'd fill up the family bathtub, and everyone would go through the same thing of water, and then you get done, you toss the water out. But everyone gets their bath in for the week, then they go to church, and you're good to go. So, that's a potential reality to look at as far as water goes. Another thing, too, is just having the water on hand is nice, but eventually, you're going to run out of water. So how do you get more water? And how do you make sure that water is clean? Well, one of the easy ways to do that for sure out of the gate, generally, is boiling the water. Is, trying to pour it through some type of filter if there's something in it. You could even use something as simple as like a schmog or like those tactical scarf things, and throw it over a pan, pour the water into the pan, then boil the water. Right? So boiling water kills a lot of bacteria, not all, but a lot of bacteria that's in water. So let's say you've boiled the water. There is a formula for a certain amount of bleach to 2 gallons of water that you can use for drops of bleach, where it does give the water a little bit of a bleachy taste depending on the size of the container and how much bleach you're using. And there's a formula for that. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's definitely it's available on. You can just Google it and see how depending on the size of the container that you have of water, you can add a drop or 2 of bleach. Preferably, I think it's the unscented stuff you have to use, like legit bleach. Also, iodine tablets. You can generally get those in the camping section of any store. Like, you can go to a local Walmart where they've got like all the discount camping stuff and get iodine tablets. And basically, generally I believe they're for like 1 tablet for a quart, and it takes a little bit to work into your water. But I think it's like 15 minutes, something like that. But you throw one of those in there, you got a quart of clean water, basically a canteen's worth, and you're good to go. They come in, generally there's 50 tablets, so you've got 50 quarts. That's a decent amount of water that you can go through and kind of sanitize as you need it. So that's a really good way to go through there too. Products like Life Straws or other types of Sawyer water filters, things like this, or other types of water filters that can fit onto individual bottles, or you can fit certain amounts of water into them and drink directly from. Those are great things to look into. They're fairly inexpensive for some of the entry-level ones. There are bigger and better things out there. A Life Straw is a good way to get started if you don't have anything else. They're fairly affordable. They're fairly inexpensive. They're cheap and easy to use. You can throw them in a kit. They're light. As you kind of learn what you're doing, there's more expensive stuff out there. There's better stuff out there for sure. The Life Straw is not the end-all be-all. There's definitely some stuff it doesn't filter, but it does a good job for the average person. Another thing too is you can get larger filters that you can do 55 gallons, and you can build your own filters as well. There's tutorials on YouTube I would start looking into on how to build your own at-home water filters and kind of see what needs to get done, and if you have the capability to do so. And I would advocate to start looking that up and seeing if you can. So now that you've got food and water taken care of, and you've figured out how to sustain yourself with water and how to get more of it. Another consideration too, outside of food and water, is going to be shelter. Now, most of us live in a house, obviously, or live in some type of shelter, but not a lot of us live in an area where we have wood heat. And so wintertime, for a lot of us, could become a potential issue, especially if you live in the Northwest or live up north like I do, where it's cold, very, very, very cold in the winter. It can get very, very cold. I don't have a fireplace in where I live. I have central air, so or I have forced air is how my house is heated and cooled, and so it becomes an issue in the wintertime with the power to cut out. How do we keep it warm? Well, you could have potentially have things like a Mr. Buddy heater, which is basically a propane heater for like a space heater that operates on propane, so you don't have to worry about power or batteries or anything like that. But another thing potentially you could do as well, that's a pretty effective way to warm up a room, is generally try to find the smallest room you can reasonably all fit in with you and your family, and you can take a clay pot, flip it upside down, like a clay planter, right? Flip it upside down, so the hole that the water would come out of on the bottom is on the top. Elevate it slightly above a little tea candle. You can get those at the dollar store in a pack of like 30 of them. And the heat radiated from the candle will radiate into the clay and then further radiate out after that. And it amplifies pretty well. I've tried it before in my garage, which is really cold in the winter. And it works fairly well, and it heats a pretty good amount of space off of that little thing. And you don't need a lot. It's not like you're building a massive fire under there. You don't really have to worry about, carbon monoxide buildup killing you in the middle of the night, because you're using a tea candle, and it's not really, it's basically the kind of candle you'd take a bath with to, set the mood for sexy time. It's not really, enough to really worry about. But it is an effective way to heat up a small space. You could run several of these or a couple of these if you needed to heat up a larger area and make a larger home warm. But it's a really good way to heat your house. Now, if you live in a hotter environment where keeping cool is more important, when it comes to that, you're going to have to get kind of creative when it comes to ways of cooling down your house. Some of these are going to be covering up windows or certain areas where heat comes through. For example, I have a pretty big skylight built into my roof, and it's really nice to have in the wintertime or on rainy days when the sun finally peeks out. And it's like, oh, nice. In the summertime, though, it makes the house pretty hot. So covering those up, opening up as many windows as possible, trying to figure out how to make cross breezes. Obviously, electric fans, things like this are not going to be a thing. Trying to find ways to keep cool is going to be important, which again comes back to shade, comes back to water, comes back to hand fans. 100 years ago, air conditioning was not everywhere. So people lived for a long time in hot areas and dealt with it and learned how to deal with the heat. So we can go back to that. It'll be uncomfortable, but we'll be all right. So another interesting part about this too, that I think is a really important one, is the idea of medical as well. With this, I think it's also the hardest to prepare yourself for, because unless you are a trained medical professional, I feel like you don't really have, you don't know what you don't know, right? For me, I wouldn't consider myself a medical professional in any means. I've gone through TCCC a ridiculous number of times. I've done a lot of first aid, a lot of combat lifesaver type courses, a lot of TCCC type courses. So my medical knowledge is built around that, about basically how to fix you up just enough to get you on to somebody else who actually knows what they're doing. So if we're preparing for a scenario where medical care is not easily accessible, I think that realistically it's a scenario that we should prepare for is basically kind of going back to the Old West as far as when it comes to medical care, in the sense that a lot of your stuff is going to be trying to make someone good enough to get them to doc, right? To get them to the doctor, which, depending on the extent of the scenario we're talking about, may or may not have access to all of the modern medicines, and it may be a day or two, maybe before they can make it out to you. It just kind of depends. Now, the sad thing is, that doesn't even necessarily have to be like a total collapse, grid down type of scenario. If you are in maybe a more rural area, I know the area where I grew up, we lived in a small county who had a small county hospital. There were certain things they could do, certain things they couldn't. And I know that if we were looking at a larger population needing to use the facilities of the hospital, they'd be overwhelmed or they would run out of stuff. If there's supply chain issues, that could be a potential problem, especially when it comes to medications, a lot of which are made overseas, or at least parts of them are. So that's another thing to consider as well, is that it doesn't even necessarily have to be a complete breakdown for there to be issues. You could be looking at potential supply chain shortages just due to an economic disaster or an economic downturn, to where it might be harder to get a hold of medications or harder to get a hold of things. Even something as simple as like ibuprofen, Tylenol, things like that. The dollar store, I think, is a great way to stock up on some of the non-perishable medical items. I think it's a great way to go. You can get hydrogen peroxide, you can get rubbing alcohol, gauze, Band-Aids, Vaseline, a bunch of just really pretty basic stuff for first aid from the dollar store. Obviously for $1, it's really cheap. Every time I go to the dollar store, I pick up a thing of hydrogen peroxide, rubbing alcohol, and a thing of gauze and bandages, because you never know. Sometimes, it's stuff that we use all the time anyway at the house for incidents and accidents and boo-boos, things like that. But other times it's also nice to really have a lot of that on hand if you needed it for any type of medical emergency. As far as higher levels of care, obviously I would hope at this point in time you've already got all your Gucci kit secured and you've got an IFAC, which is great, but hopefully you have more than one. I like to keep an IFAC in each of my vehicles, and then I like to have a more extensive one for the house, and then obviously one's on my kit. And basic contents of your standard IFAC, as well as tourniquets. But with that too, I know some people will go and they'll get trauma bags and they will get very extensive medical gear, but they don't always have the training to use all of this stuff or to know really what they've got. Or they'll go the opposite route and they'll find the cheapest medical kit they can find on Amazon and then be like, yep, we're good. Not really the place to go. I would say if you're looking at medical stuff, you definitely don't want to go cheap in regards of like getting just like crap. You want to get stuff that you're going to trust your life to, because that's literally what you're doing. You are potentially trusting your life to the medical equipment that you have. So you want to make sure it's good and it's legit. But also, and I think this is the harder part, is trying to find good training on how to use this medical kit. Now, you might get lucky and maybe local EMTs or local fire departments are putting on courses or classes for free sometimes, or for a small fee to be able to teach people how to do this. Or maybe you work somewhere where first aid is required as part of your job or as part of your trainings, and so you can get some level of training for that. I know, unfortunately, with the numbers of shootings that there are, that a lot of workplaces have started active shooter training, which part of that requires some type of trauma care or medical care. But unless you're really trained in that higher level of care, or how to actually, treat the gunshot wound more than just, hey, I put gauze in it, wrapped a tourniquet on it, you need to be trying to figure out, like, what would you do in that scenario? Like, is there something that, one, you're capable of doing? And I'm not necessarily saying like home teach yourself how to be a doctor. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like know your limitations. Like, what are you capable of, and what would you need to go to higher care for, and how would you go about that? Is there a way for you to get someone to a hospital? Is there perhaps maybe a local doctor that that you could potentially get to? Like, what are your alternatives in a scenario where you can't necessarily go straight to the doctor? And that's a great segue too for something else in that regard, to where if you are going to be someone who's raiding, if you are going to be someone who you think is going to be, out in the woods doing goon boy stuff, depending on the scenario that you're in, like, you might, that might be a reality, is like, you might not have the luxury of an actual doctor. You might not have the luxury of finding someone who can actually fix you up. So keep that in mind, depending on how that scenario plays out. You might be limited to just your medical expertise as far as how to use an IFAC. So know your limitations and then plan your actions according to the risk. So, if you're like, hey man, this is a high risk situation that I could potentially get pretty hurt doing this, you might want to weigh that against the fact of like, okay, well, if I get really hurt in this, what are my options for medical care? Do I have any? Is it still worth the risk? So these are things to think about when it comes to this as far as sustainment. Now, as far as some smaller, more minor items out of that, I would say any type of electrical things that you have that require batteries, whether it be weapon optics, whether it be night vision or anything along those lines, comms, radios, things like this, I would obviously advocate get as many batteries as humanly possible, as economically as possible. Store them away. Make sure you've got plenty of them. AA's, AAA's, CR123s, whatever. If you got any weird proprietary optics, or a lot of optics take the 2025s or the 2016s or the 1620s, I think they are, for the different like watch style batteries. Make sure you have a couple on hand, right? I know like my Trijicon RMR on my Glock 34, like its battery life measured in years. It's like change the battery every 2 birthdays. But depending on what the scenario that you're looking at, it might be advisable to have more than one, because you never know. You don't know how long that scenario is going to take place. It's nice to have extra stuff on hand and not need it. Same thing goes for lighters. Really any piece of kit that you have that requires some kind of outside thing to support it, whether it be batteries or something like that, make sure you stock up on those as good as you can and as reasonably as possible. And finally, we come down to security. So when it comes to security, I think that it is obviously an important part, and it is a required part, because realistically, having all of this doesn't mean anything if you don't have a way to defend yourself and to keep your stuff from other people who may potentially be raiding. You want to make sure that you are a deterrent to that. But I'm not going to beat the dead horse of making sure you've got tons of ammo, tons of mags, things like that on hand. What I am going to say, though, is look at security from a different aspect. Consider like basically yourself as a circle, and how far out can you expand that circle of security. So if you have, let's say, your EDC, your circle includes yourself. You can protect yourself. Or maybe we can extend it to your family. You and your immediate family that's right next to you, in the same household as you. You can defend your home, which is great. But you and your significant other, if you have one, are going to have to sleep at some point in time. So unless you're doing 12 on, 12 off with your significant other, you're going to need somebody else to watch your back. So what I would recommend is, if you haven't already, try to meet your neighbors, right? Talk to them. You don't have to get into the weeds about preparedness or anything like that right off the bat. Do I advocate having those conversations? Absolutely. But, obviously test the waters and see where they're at with something like that. Don't just dive right in and start talking about, Russians falling from the sky and having a year's worth of food, whatever. They might think you're a crazy person. You might be a crazy person, but not a great way to start. So I would say, just kind of slowly ease into it, but start to know your neighbors and kind of figure out like, hey, are there any people on my block that might be a problem or a potential issue? I know, like, I've got a buddy of mine who does not have super great neighbors and and his neighbors are kind of douchebags, right? And it's one of those things where it's like, okay, got it, noted. In case of a scenario like we've mentioned, you need to be someone I need to keep my eye on, or potentially raise my level of awareness to whenever things potentially go bad. Because if things are the way they are now, which are pretty good, and you're being like this, now add the stress of whatever scenario we're preparing for onto the mix, you might be a potential problem. Conversely, who might be a potential ally? Can you expand that circle, right, to include your neighbors? Could you potentially be like, all right, I've got the neighbor to my left and the neighbor to my right, and then the house behind me and the house in front of me. Now we've kind of started to build a community watch. We're families looking out for each other. Now that's little bit of security expands that little bit from your house to your cul-de-sac or your neighborhood, your apartment building or whatever. You've expanded it outside yourself, and then see further, like maybe, oh, my friend lives just across town. Okay, so maybe those circles don't intersect yet, but I got a circle here and I got a circle there. Okay, now I got another buddy over here. How many other places can you start to grow that sense of security? And hopefully, in an ideal, perfect world, you could expand it to the point to where it would encompass a decent amount of area around you to make sure that you are protected and you are secure in your area, and everyone can kind of work together, and you've eliminated the potential threats in your area that without ever having to fire a shot. Like, the best fight to get in is the one you don't have to get in, right? And being diplomatic in your approach to things, not being a douchebag to your neighbors straight out of the gate, or, just being an a-hole, but being friendly to your neighbors, and even the ones that you might potentially disagree with. Don't present yourself as a target. If, maybe you've got like raging liberal neighbors, okay, conduct yourself accordingly. Don't be an a-hole. Try to be the nice guy. Obviously, if they're being dicks to you, whatever, okay, whatever, game on. But, if try to be cordial with everybody. Don't paint a target on your back, right? Keep tabs of who you may or may not want to help. Keep tabs of who may or may not become a problem, or what potential problems there may be. But also, like, hey, does anyone have any useful skills that might be able to help me out here? Or, who could I trust potentially here? Or who do I think I could trust, at least, if things went down? And hopefully maybe have some conversations with them. Build that idea of trust and friendship and coordination before you have to rely on each other. So that way you can kind of have a good idea of how things may go if they do go south. So I think that's a huge part of it. Also, maybe could you, if you don't feel necessarily comfortable with having these people on like a community watch or something like that, could you at least get them to be maybe lookouts, or have some kind of comm network set up, to where some kind of way to let you know in advance that, like, hey, this guy lives at the end of my block, if he sees anything going on, maybe he could warn us or something like that. I don't live in a huge inner city. All I know, I've never lived in a huge inner city, but I know just from stuff I've seen, things I've read, a lot of inner city gangs will have lookouts that something as simple as, some dude's got a weird bird call, and that bird call gets repeated down the line, or, or says something down the line, or one guy texts another, who texts another, who texts another. Next thing you know, the whole block knows the cops are on their way. Things like that, right? Learn from those experiences and see how can you apply them to your own to expand your sense of security. And with all of these things hopefully in mind, you'll be able to further your idea of sustainment and sustainability with both yourself and whatever people you may have in a group or potential, gathering of people that you have to help you survive. And that with this, the whole idea here again is to have to avoid making crappy choices of having to, work for the bad guys or do something you don't want to do because you weren't prepared, because you didn't prepare yourself and your family. Now, instead of doing that and having to sell your soul to the devil to get some food, or dying, or having to go raid people and raid people for their things, you can continue your life in some bit of normalcy. You can stay away from the potential riots where food might be, or the potential issues where people might be having problems trying to get food, and you can stay away from that. You can stay out of it, secure yourself, secure your family, and hopefully continue to live another day. Obviously, a lot of this in my head is through an ideal world and a perfect world where this would all work out. Life throws curveballs at you, and you never really know what's going to happen. So, who knows? But these are just my thoughts on this, and something I thought like Dirty Civilian did a really good job of addressing in their video. If you go to their channel, I think it's the What Kind of American Are You? They're kind of playing on the Civil War movie that came out recently, and talking about how, like, look, a lot of us, I get, like, it's YouTube and people make comments or whatever, it's the internet, no one's, really real on the internet, and people talk a big game. But if your plan for any scenario that may happen to America is, instead of helping other people, to raid other people and take what they have, then you're the problem. Plain and simple. If your plan to solve your lack of ability to prepare ahead of time is to raid and take from other people, you are no better than the people that we complain about all day long. You are no better. If you complain about illegal immigration, you're no better than that. If you complain about Congress, anything like that, like, you're no better than they are by doing this. So keep that in mind. So with that being said, thank you guys for tuning in. It's been another episode. With that being said, guys, it's been another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed my rambling thoughts here for an hour. Hopefully next time we should be able to have Mike back on. We're hoping to do some more lighthearted, funny stuff for you. get back into the groove of what we're really good at. But anyway, with that being said, guys, I really appreciate you guys listening in. I really do appreciate you guys tuning in and listening to this. We recently crossed 500 listeners, which is a huge milestone for us. Also, go check out www.midtierthoughts.com, see what new merch we have on there. And until then, catch you on the next one.